So just how powerful of a web server do you really need to run an online store or an online course when WordPress is your CMS? Now that is a very complex question, but I'm just dumb enough to try to answer it in this video. Stay tuned. What's up everybody? It's Dave here from Profitable Tools, and I'm gonna attempt to answer the age-old question of which hosting plan should I go with? Not necessarily which host should you go with, but how should you spec your server if you're using WordPress to build an online course or an e-commerce store, or both at the same time. Now, all you Cliff Clavens of the WordPress world out there, you know who you are. This is not going to be a completely scientific process, right? There's a lot of variables involved here. I'm simply going to give people a method to check and see if they're kind of in the ballpark before they scale up their server. You don't want to pay too little and give your users a bad experience, but you also don't want to pay too much and end up just wasting money on resources for a server that are never being used. Now, as I mentioned, this isn't really about recommending a specific host, but I want to kind of persuade people who are not there already to give up the idea of the old shared hosting model. Where we really want to go with our businesses in 2021 and beyond is to look at the commodity providers of services for computing. I'm talking about Amazon AWS, Google Cloud Platform. Smaller ventures like Vultr, Linode, and DigitalOcean all have great offerings as well. These companies are all very similar in the fact that they will just sell you raw computing power, and then it's up to you to manage it and actually use it. Now, the hold up here is a lot of people are not very technically minded when it comes to administrating a server. That is pretty difficult to do. Honestly, it's an entirely different occupation. So we are going to enlist the help of some tools, and this is where a slight plug for my favorite hosting providers will come into play. So Cloudways is this service that I find myself recommending to most people most of the time. It's a really great service. It doesn't require you to have your own accounts with all of these commodity providers. You can see their partners down here. They work with all of the names I just dropped a moment ago. And what they'll actually do is you sign up for their service. They mark up the commodity providers a little bit. So you pay a little more when you go with Cloudways, but they give you a really great graphical user interface, and they bill you by the second, really. So I'm gonna do some testing here. It's gonna take me a few hours to complete, but it's not going to cost me very much money, even though I'm going to use rather large servers to do testing. And the reason for that is I don't have to sign up for a long-term contract. So Cloudways is really great if you're doing some one-off testing, if you just want to run one or two businesses on a WordPress website. I highly recommend checking out Cloudways. The other option to consider is Gridpane, which is actually what my business uses for our hosting for our clients. The benefit of Gridpane is that you pay a monthly fee, a flat fee, and then you can add as many servers as you want. The downside is you need to have accounts with each of the commodity service providers. So you're paying two people then, in a sense. You're paying Gridpane, you're also paying AWS or Vultr, whoever you use, and you have to do a little bit more server administration. So if you're dealing with an agency scenario, or you have literally dozens of businesses that you're overseeing, then I recommend checking out Gridpane. Otherwise, I'll be using Cloudways in this video. I will have links for those down below. Otherwise, this is not a sponsored video. So if you want to help me produce more content like this and you're looking for some hosting, go ahead and check out my links. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and fire up a server on Cloudways, and then I'll explain to you how I'm going to be doing the load testing for this video. So first things first, let's go ahead and launch a brand new server over on Cloudways. I'm going to choose a WordPress server here. It doesn't really matter what I call it because it's only temporary. We're going to be using DigitalOcean for this video, and we're going to be testing several things. How does server load respond to RAM? How does it respond to CPU speed? And we'll see how that adjusts as things scale up. So we're going to start off with the absolute smallest DigitalOcean server. This is $10 a month. You can see that Cloudways doesn't even want me to use this unless it's for a staging site, but you might be surprised the performance we can get out of this 1 GB site. You might notice these icons underneath some of the plans here. What these are the new faster CPU cores that are available on some DigitalOcean plans. So what this will allow us to do is see how CPU actually affects load performance. How many concurrent users can we have on our website with a 1 GB site versus a 1 GB site with a faster kind of overclocked, type of CPU, a higher performance core CPU. So that'll be really interesting to see. Let's go ahead and launch this server and we'll get into the testing. All right, so my server is spinning up right now. And while this is spinning up, I'm gonna go ahead and show you one of the applications I'll be using to do the testing. So this is loader.io. It's a service from SendGrid. They do transactional email services, but loader.io is a really great way to emulate load on a server. Now, I know that this is not a comprehensive test, but at least gives us a little bit of a scientific lab to play in to see how servers respond to enormous amounts of concurrent requests without having to pay all of our buddies or maybe hire an entire Facebook group to go bombard a server and see how long it takes to bring it down. So as soon as my Cloudways server spins up, I'll be connecting that default WordPress website up to loader.io and we'll begin doing the testing. I'll explain all the numbers as we go through. All right, so my server has spun up. I'll just take you through the process of connecting it up to loader.io. First of all, I'm gonna go ahead and get the URL for the server itself, which Cloudways gives me right here. I can just copy this. So you can see this is just a default WordPress website. Nothing fancy going on here. I simply want to test how it's going to respond to a lot of concurrent activity. Over in loader.io, I'm gonna add a new target host here. I should note that I'm using their free plan for this testing, so I only can have one host on at a time. This is not a sponsored video by them. I have no affiliation with loader.io at all. Let's go ahead and verify this domain. So why do you have to verify a domain when you're gonna do load testing? Well, if the answer is not obvious to you, let me explain. When you do load testing, we're gonna slam this server with a ton of traffic. You can imagine if you had a competitor on the internet and you wanted to slow their website down, one way to do it would be to just absolutely bombard them with traffic. So there's definitely security plugins and infrastructure out there to prevent that from happening. But loader.io is gonna make you verify that you actually own the website before they allow you to slam it with traffic. So what I'm gonna do here is just download a verification file. And then I almost never recommend, in fact, I never recommend doing this, but what I'm gonna do is actually log into the WordPress admin and just use the file manager plugin to throw it up on the web server. I don't recommend that plugin when you're doing anything on a production site, but for now, it's just the fastest way to get this online. All right, so plugins, add new. I'm just gonna search for file. It'll be the first one up here, file manager. Again, this is just kind of a security flaw to have access to all of your files inside of your WordPress admin. So don't do this unless you're doing a silly test like I am doing here today. Now, all I need to do is just drag and drop this file into this window and it'll verify over on loader.io. All right, there we go. There is the verification file. It is uploaded. I'm gonna go ahead and tell Loader to check for it. We'll click verify right here. All right, we're good to go there. Let's go ahead and do our testing. Now, before we begin our stress testing, I want to point out that I do have some caching on the server level as well as on the WordPress site. I'm going to run one test with caching on, and then I'll be disabling it for the rest of the testing. So the first test is going to kind of give us a baseline of what you can expect for pages that can be cached, and then other pages cannot be cached. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of caching, which I know it's kind of technical if you're not, really in hardcore into the WordPress world, what caching is it makes the website load faster because instead of WordPress having to go into its database and then draw the page every single time a person requests the page, it simply goes into the database once, saves that file, and then just serves up a static file to each visitor that comes to your website. Now that's great for things like landing pages or sales pages where you don't have content that's changing very often. If you change it, you can just refresh the cache. But for other things like e-commerce checkouts or online course quizzes, those things are dynamic. You don't want every visitor to have the same cart when they check out. You don't want every visitor to get the same results from their quiz. Those pages cannot be cached. So that's really what comes into play when you're talking about how many people can be on your website at any given moment. So we'll do our first test with caching on, and then we'll turn it off for the rest of the testing. All right, let's begin a new test over on loader.io. So here is how I'm gonna set up the test. I'll just call it demo. And the test type I'm gonna choose is maintain client load. So what's gonna happen here is over the course of a minute, I'm gonna be able to increase the number of clients that are hitting the website at one time. At a certain point, our website will reach a critical point where it's not optimal anymore. It's not going to be a good user experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that the website will break. It will just feel sluggish. So Google has a specific metric they're looking for here. It's under 200 milliseconds response time. So what that means is when you click on something on the website, it has 200 milliseconds to respond back to the person who clicked. After that, Google starts to think that the website is maybe a little bit slow. Now, in all actuality, most of the top performing websites are between 200 and 300 milliseconds response time. But as long as you keep your response time under 500 milliseconds, you're going to be just fine. Again, the website will still work. It's just going to be one of those sites where you click and then you sit and you wait and it's frustrating and you dread having to go to that website because it's not a good experience. What we want to do is balance out having a snappy website that's a joy to use, but doesn't have just a ton of resources that never get utilized. All right, so for this first test, remember I have caching on. I'm going to test up to 750 clients. This is a 1 gigabyte server, $10 a month over on Cloudways. If you're buying it direct from the vendor, it's going to be closer to $5 a month. All right, let's go ahead and run the test. All right, so the test has just begun. We're about 5-6 seconds in, and the numbers that you're seeing on the chart, they're gonna be constantly changing, so I can't really pinpoint them till the test is done. But the numbers you're gonna be seeing are how many clients are on the website versus the response time. So right now, we have hit about 300 clients on the website, and the average response time is right around 125 milliseconds. So I will get back to you when this test ends in about 30 seconds. Okay, so the test is all done. Let's make some sense of the numbers. So what we're looking for is when the average response time goes above 200 milliseconds. Now, remember, some are going to be higher than that and some are going to be lower than that. It's just the average time at that point. So we're at 197.37 seconds into the test. And if I check the other line, that'll tell me how many users I have at 37 seconds. So 479 clients at the same time accessing the website. So does this mean you can have 479 people accessing your online course at once? Well, yes, kind of, maybe. Remember, not everyone's going to be clicking an action at the same time, and some actions are going to require more than one engagement from your server. So these numbers are rough, but we're just trying to get a ballpark number. Remember, this is for cached content, so it's not going to work for all of the pages on your website. By the end of the test, when we had reached 750 clients, our average response time was 352 milliseconds. Now there's some other data to point out here. The minimum response time, so when it was just getting started, I would assume, the minimum response time was 14 milliseconds, and the highest response time that it ever received was 652 milliseconds, which is still bearable. I mean, honestly, we've all clicked on a page and it's taken a second to load before. We're talking about a little bit more than half of a second. It's not the end of the world, but we don't want our website to respond like that with every single click. So bottom line is I can stay under 200 milliseconds and serve up to 479 clients on this cached page. If I'm just worried about staying under 500 milliseconds, I can do 750 plus. All right, so I'm going to turn off caching for the next test, but you might be thinking, how can I test the response time of my site without just bombarding it with tons of traffic? Well, you can use a tool like Pingdom, and what you want to look for is the time to first byte. That's going to be the same metric as the response time. All right, so let's go ahead and disable caching over on Cloudways here. I'm going to do this first at the server level. So I'm up here in the server tab. I'll click on my server, and then I'm going to go down to Manage Services. And here I can see I have the varnish caching on. So I'm going to go ahead and disable this. All right, so varnish caching is now turned off. And now over at the site level, I'm going to go ahead and go into my plugins, and Cloudways by default will install their Breeze plugin, which is just a page cache. So we have two different levels of caching. I'm going to disable this. Now I should have no caching going on my website at all. Let's go ahead and rerun the test and see how this affects the results. I'm going to edit the test before I rerun it because we will have to have some different numbers going on here. All right, so instead of 0 to 750 clients for non-cache content, I'm going to do 0 to 50 clients. We should see quite a different response from the server here. Now remember, this is going to be the more critical test for our site because this is going to be things like your checkout page. So if you're doing a big promotion, a big launch, and you have lots of traffic going to your checkout page, You don't want that to be slow or, God forbid, for it to crash. All right, let's run this test with 50 clients over the course of 1 minute. All right, so the test has just begun. We're about 20 seconds in, and our average response time is already well over the 200 barrier that Google expects to see from us. We can see we crossed this about 10 seconds into the test. So I'll give you the final numbers here in a second. All right, so the test is complete, and at 11 seconds in, we hit 196 millisecond average response time. That's going to be equal to 10 clients concurrently. Now, that's not really that bad if you have a $10 a month website and you can still serve 10 concurrent users. Think about your online course. How many people are actually logging in at any given time? Unless you're extremely successful, in which $10 a month isn't really going to be a relevant number, then that's pretty good, right? Because if you have 100 users, 10% logged in at any given time, unless you have live events planned, that's probably a pretty high number. So brass tacks on our $10 a month server without caching, if you want to stay under the 200 millisecond threshold for response time, you'll be able to serve about 11 clients per second. If you're willing to bump up to the 500 millisecond range, you're looking at the 24 client per second range. All right, let's move on. We're going to scale up here. I'm going to go over to vertical scaling inside of Cloudways, and we're going to move from a gigabyte server to a 1 gigabyte server with faster cores. This is going to cost me an extra $2 per month. So is it worth it to go from a $10 a month plan to a $12 a month plan when I'm not getting any more RAM? Let's find out. So the scaling just takes a few seconds. I'm going to pause the video. I'll be right back. All right, my server is now scaled up to the 1 gigabyte plan with faster CPU scores. Let's run another test. I'm going to keep the settings exactly the same here since the 1 gigabyte plan kind of struggled around 10 or so clients. So I think we should be fine with 0 to 50 again. Let's run the test. All right, so the test is underway. We have about 10 seconds left here, and then we'll analyze the results of this newer server with faster CPUs, but the same amount of RAM. All right, so interestingly enough, this server actually performed a little bit worse than the first one. Now this is one test. We should really run this several times at each level to get an average result because that's just how computers work. But I can see that I passed the 200 millisecond response time about 8 seconds in, which was faster than the previous test, which was around 11, I think. And at 8 seconds, we're only serving 8 clients. So on our $12 a month server, we actually got slightly lower results than just our $10 a month server. Don't be too surprised here. It's silicon. Sometimes you get really good chips, which our first server might have been. Other times you could get underperforming chips, which this certainly could have been as well. So we're looking at the 200 millisecond threshold. You can hit about 8 clients per second. If you want to stay at that 500 millisecond threshold, you'll be able to serve about 17 clients. So what if we doubled our RAM? Let's go back to vertical scaling here. I'm going to move up to the next plan, which has the slower CPU cores, but it has twice as much RAM as the very first test. This is getting a little bit more expensive. It is $22 a month. Let's go ahead and scale this up. All right, my server's all scaled up. You can see I've got 2 gigabytes of RAM here. I would hypothesize that I should see about twice as many concurrent users or concurrent actions to the server before things start to pass our 200 millisecond threshold. So we should see about 23, 24 concurrent clients before we pass that threshold. Let's go ahead and test it out. So given my hypothesis, I'll keep the settings of the test exactly the same, 0 to 50 clients in 1 minute. Let's run it. And the test is underway. All right, the results are in, and quite honestly, I'm shocked. They didn't change at all. So we are at 194 milliseconds over here. And if I check how many clients that is, it's 11 seconds, roughly where we were for our very first test. And 11 seconds, that's 10 clients per second. So that is exactly, I think, the numbers that we had on our very first test and a little bit higher than we had with the faster CPU core. So we're not really seeing any difference here with a faster host. This is not what I expected. So with the $22 a month server, we're just not going to be able to serve that many more clients than we would with a $10 or a $12 a month server over on Cloudways. So we're looking at 11 clients under that 200 millisecond threshold. So if you want the fastest website, $22 is probably not going to be enough to spend on your server. But if you're okay with extending things, we did actually see an increase here. Up to 500 milliseconds response time, we were able to hit 26 clients per second. So that is not nothing, but it's not really the gains I expected to see. All right, so I'm not going to quit here. Let's beef things up a little bit further. We're going to go up to the 2 GB plan with the premium faster cores. This is $26 a month. The scaling is happening now. Each time, by the way, I'm cutting out about 6 or 7 minutes while the server scales up. And then after that, there's about a 1 or 2 minute delay where Cloudways seems to be assigning it a new IP address or reattaching the domain to the existing IP address. So I think what they're doing at the DigitalOcean level is actually cloning the server and then moving the IP over. I know it's a little technical, but if you're wondering how this is happening, they're not just vertically scaling up the instance, because you're not able to switch back and forth between the faster CPUs and the slower CPUs if you go to DigitalOcean directly. So Cloudways, to work around that, has cleverly figured out a cloning solution where they can just detach IPs. All right, so we're back up and running with the scaled up server. We've got 2 GB of RAM still, but we've got the faster CPU scores designated by this premium tag. Let's go ahead and run another test. Hopefully we actually move the needle a little bit here. I would have expected it, maybe even with the first upgrade. So let's go ahead and rerun the same configuration. We'll have 50 concurrent users over the course of 1 minute. All right, so the test is done, and boy, am I confused, because at 200 milliseconds, we are still right around that 9-second mark. It's actually even a little bit less. So once again, our faster CPU cores have underperformed the regular CPU cores. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but if you're trying to stay under that 200 millisecond response time, you're going to be able to serve about 9 clients with the $26 a month server. And if you want to hit that 500 millisecond threshold, you'll be able to hit about 20 clients per second. So at this point, I started to get a little bit suspicious. I wasn't really seeing the increases that I expected as we scaled up our server. So what I decided to do was go ahead and set up a website over on DigitalOcean directly, bypassing Cloudways altogether. This way we could take their tech stack out of the equation and actually see if they were helping things load faster or maybe they were slowing things down. That's what this test is. Let's cut to it right now. All right, so same settings as before. We're going from 0 clients to 50 clients over the course of 1 minute. No caching. This time we're going with DigitalOcean directly, running without any sort of infrastructure in between. Let's go ahead and run the test. All right, the testing is underway. All right, so the results are in, and I would actually say the DigitalOcean server performed worse than using Cloudways. We had a big spike in response time kind of in the middle of the test, like the server couldn't keep up. It might not be configured as well right out of the box. I'm trying to limit any sort of interaction I have to do with the server administration, because I think that's kind of what Cloudways should do for you. So right here we had a about 10-second spike where the average response time was almost 2 seconds. We're at like 1.7 seconds at the peak here. So really quite a big spike, but really decreased performance here. We're looking at, about 7-8 seconds of load time, which is going to equate to, about 7 or 8 users over the course of the test. So at 7 seconds, we have 7 clients. At 8 seconds, we have 8 clients. And that's really where we're passing that 230 millisecond range. So who knew, but Cloudways tech stack is actually decently optimized. If you install WordPress directly on DigitalOcean without any optimizations, just using their app, you'll be able to serve about 7 clients before you surpass that 200 millisecond response time. If you go up to 500 milliseconds, you're looking at about 12 clients per second. So with that established, let's head back over to Cloudways and see what the next level up has entailed over there. All right, so let's scale up again. Are we going to see any sort of increase in our server's behavior at this point? I sure hope so. Let's go over to vertical scaling, and I'm going to move this up to the 4 GB a month plan. This is $42 a month. Let's see what happens. All right, so we're back with the 4 GB server. Without further ado, let's go ahead and run this test one more time. So 0 to 50 clients in 1 minute. Let's go to it. All right, so we're all done with the test, and once again, not a huge boost in performance. About 11 seconds in, we're hitting the same results. So it's very interesting to me that it doesn't seem to matter how big the server is, it's pretty much getting killed at the exact same time. Well, not killed. It's getting slowed down at the exact same time. So there are definitely reasons to upgrade to a $42 per month server, but it turns out that time to first byte or response time is not one of them. The results are going to be basically the same. 200 milliseconds will get you about 10 clients, and staying under 500 milliseconds, you'll see about 22 clients. All right, we're going to do this one more time. We'll move up to the 4 GB faster CPU version. Let's test it. Back over to vertical scaling, 4 GB premium CPUs. We got $50 a month here. Let's scale up. All right, we're back with a 4 GB upscaled server with a premium CPU, the faster CPU cores. Let's go ahead and rerun the same test. All right, so the tests are in, and finally we've got some real results. This time we made it to about 24 seconds before we hit an average response time of 199 milliseconds, not crossing that 200 millisecond threshold set by the Google overlords. And at that point, we're at right around 21 clients or so. Overall, you can see the slope of this line is very, very steady, and it never crosses 500 milliseconds. So huzzah, finally some results. The $50 a month server will basically double the number of clients you can serve before you cross the 200 millisecond response time threshold set by Google. And if you are willing to suffer all the way up to a 500 millisecond response time, you'll be able to hit more than 50 clients per second. So let's say you have 50 transactions per second, like 50 people checking out through your e-commerce website, and you're okay with that half-second load time. You're gonna be in pretty good shape with a server like this, because that would be approximately 3,000 transactions per minute. And that's gonna be a lot for most stores. So here is a final comparison chart. You can see there are a few sweet spots. By the way, I did remove the DigitalOcean server from this comparison. I wanted you to be able to see all of the Cloudways plans compared with each other. Now, a few more disclaimers here so you don't go into this blindly. The tech stack that you choose will greatly affect the end results of your server. Just installing things like WooCommerce and LearnDash is going to put a certain strain on your server. At that point, you might really greatly benefit from seeing extra CPU cores or extra RAM available to your server. I think once you get an LMS on there, you're probably going to want to have at least 2 GB of RAM on your server for it to be a good experience just for you working on the back end. But again, that's up to you and your budget. I think most businesses are going to want to go for that $50 a month server. And if you're just getting started, feel free to start off with a $10 a month server. As you can see, it's going to be just fine to get you your first few clients. All right, so hopefully this testing has been helpful to you, and you can see the impact that RAM and CPU speed has on the performance of your website. You also have a little bit better idea on what to look for when you're doing speed tests. What are the important numbers? Everybody always looks for page load time, which is important, but response time is also equally as important. That's going to do it for this video. If you want to check out some of the hosts that I recommend, click the links down below. That is affiliate links, so I do get a little bit of a kickback when you do that. Otherwise, make sure you subscribe, click the notification bell, and visit the Facebook group. I'll see you in the next video.